Welcome to Podcast 83, a regular look at the news, stories, and trends related to Michigan's 83 counties from the Michigan Association of Counties. Brought to you in part by Comcast, bringing the power of the internet into Michigan homes and businesses. Now, here's your host, MAC Executive Director Stephen Curry.
Looks good. Hello, everyone. Welcome to MAC Podcast 83. I see some new faces on here, which is exciting. Hi, Jenny.
Hey, Deena, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm okay.
Good to see you. Good to see you. Yeah, we've invited some of the other countywide electeds to join the podcast whenever it works for them. So we may see new faces here on a hopefully regular basis. Pretty exciting. So welcome back, everyone. Couple of notices or just announcements. If you want to ask a question, you can put it in the chat. We'd be happy to answer your questions if you have any. We're going to do this podcast today without Steve. So I think
it's your lucky day.
I think we can handle it. But, you know, we do all miss him and hope he's all right. Other issue is we're going to do our podcast today, but then we're going to be off for 3 weeks. So I apologize for that, but next week is our conference. And so hopefully we will see all of you there. And then the 2 weeks after that is going to be the legislative spring break. So there's not going to be a whole lot to report. So we'll be back on the 11th of April. And with that, Meghann, you have been paying very close attention to what's going on at the federal level with their budget and had a great call with NACO last week. Some drama. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, always drama at every level of government, I suppose. And so last week, you know, we had basically this deadline where the federal budget was going to run out of time unless they passed another extension or came up with some type of spending package. And so they came up with a $1.5 trillion package that included a whole host of items that are definitely something that county governments will receive funding for. It was $840 million for grants for the drinking water state revolving funds and clean water state revolving funds. There's $75 million for election security grants, $170 million for CBDG grants that I know a lot of local governments use for housing initiatives. So a lot of really great things. And I know NACO has a whole host of things broken down into different areas, including additional broadband funding. We've seen broadband funding come in every iteration from the federal government in their spending bills lately, but another $550 million that will go out for broadband in underserved areas, including rural areas, but a whole host of things. But of course, the drama piece being that there was an additional $15 billion that would go towards COVID relief. And the administration was supporting this. However, Congress basically said, well, if we do this, we really need to offset it. And how are we going to offset that $15 billion? And so they started to look at that aid that went to state and local governments through the ARPA funds. And they said, well, we'll take $7.05 billion, I think it was, and we'll just be able to claw that back, and that'll replace 50% of that COVID-19 relief funding that they were looking for. Luckily, it was a kind of this tiered approach, and so that $7 billion would really be coming out of the state's portion of their ARPA funding. And so a lot of states weren't very happy with that because it wasn't really equitable. We saw some states come out right away, governors come out and say, hey, this isn't fair. If you were if you were a state that received a smaller amount of funding, you couldn't get yours clawed back because we didn't receive that second tranche. So it was really these states that had larger amounts that were sent to them, and they weren't happy about it. So at the end of the day, it didn't come out. The aid to COVID-19, the additional aid for COVID-19 relief, that was stripped out of the bill. That $15 billion didn't get included, and therefore they didn't really need to have any offset or clawback from those state relief funds. That being said, it was kind of a scary moment, right? Because even though it didn't touch the county or the local dollars at that point, it was a little bit of it was on the table. So putting it on the table, we don't want to see that happen again, that they look at some of this money because maybe people aren't spending it or don't have plans yet to spend it. And I know at the state level, we've been working very hard to, urge them to start getting some of this money out the door. I know a lot of counties are looking at different ways to get some of that money out the door as well, but also waiting for some state decisions, right? To see if we have some match programs or see how we can really maximize these dollars. So the second tranche.
That's a really good point though. Yeah, make sure, number one, it's not touching county dollars. And states, if they're talking about clawing it back, you better hurry up and figure out how you're going to spend it. So that it's not like available to be clawed back. I think that, it's once in a lifetime chance to invest in our state and our infrastructure and our businesses and get on it.
And I think the good thing is, this is really being talked about, that second tranche of money that's slated to come out in a couple months here. So it's not necessarily, hey, we've given you the money and now we're going to take it back. It's, hey, we know we have some money that we've told you you're going to receive. But the check hasn't been cut yet. So the closer we get to May, I think it's May 10th, that those checks will actually start, that second tranche, and those checks will actually be sent out. I think it'll be more difficult in the future to threaten this clawback of funds. But it was on the table now, and I think it's just more encouragement for counties to really talk about some of the good collaboration they're doing, some of the good plans that they have in place. I know NACO actually has a really great portal that you could submit your stories. And so if you have allocated any funds or obligated any money to certain projects, you can go and just click one button and upload a little story to just help show that message to the federal government that their money is being, that they provided to the counties and local governments. So that's, really making a difference and providing some impact to the communities.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks. Speaking of that and allocations, I know that many, many counties are looking at investing their money into broadband. And, it is an eligible expenditure. There's money out there for it. I just want to talk about that a little bit. The state has, probably over $1 billion it will have at its for resources for broadband build out. But a lot of things have to happen first. We still haven't seen the supplemental that actually allocates some of the broadband money the state has received already. So we can't really start the process of broadband build out until they pass a supplemental budget that gives staff to the office. They can write the plans for the broadband build out and apply for the federal grants. So still moving on those supplementals is extremely important. Last week in our legislative update, Hannah wrote an article that really details out the different funding amounts the state of Michigan is eligible to receive. Some will be direct allocation, $100 million at a minimum from the BEAD program, and probably up to like 1.3 billion. But we're not going to get that until we have good mapping done and staffing for the MyHigh office. If that's where it goes, it could go to a different office, but at least staffing a designated internet office. Then they have to write up the plan for the whole state. And then once it happens, they can apply for the funds. Then the funds can come into the state, but then we're going to have a grant program that gives it out to local units of government, or a match program, maybe in the supplemental language for when money comes, so that you guys can utilize those resources to do your build out. So just be aware, we're keeping an eye on it. We're trying to push hard to get at least that office staffed so that we can be in the running for all of this money that's been allocated, not just for mapping, but for build out, for the components necessary, for the labor, for digital equity and access. So making sure that people know how to use the internet, where to go to get it, how to, utilize their computers and all of that kind of stuff. Very important. There's middle mile money. There's money for, rural connections and broadband. So it's there, and I know everyone really wants to get it going and get it off the ground. At this point, we don't have state or federal match dollars ready to be deployed. which is the problem. We have asked and talked to Senator Stabenow's office that we're hoping to get retroactive match monies. In other words, if you spend money now getting broadband built out in your area, can that retroactively count toward your match once the federal dollars are sent out and allocated? So we don't have an answer on that yet, but we're working on it. That was a really good question, I think, from one of our board members that we've been trying to get an answer to for a couple of months now. And so we said that, yeah, no move on supplementals yet. We talked about the pension supplemental last week. We're still waiting on water, and everybody says water and infrastructure supplemental is next. Water and infrastructure supplemental is next. It's next. No, it's next. No, we really mean it this time. It's next. But I think that, negotiations are still struggling a little bit. We don't know. We don't know when it's actually going to get done. And why do you think they're struggling, Megan? What's happening this week in the Senate that is going to, drive a deeper wedge?
Yeah, the past couple of weeks, of course, everyone's been feeling it at the pump when you go fill up your fuel tank. And the state has general fund revenues higher than they've ever seen. And so the legislature is really looking at different ways to find some tax cuts. And so they started having conversations, and the House passed a proposal to suspend the 27-cent gas tax for basically 6 months. Fiscal analysis has it at about 700 to 750 million in general fund that would be lost out of the collections of that fuel tax. They've said, you know what, we have enough state surplus, we can absorb this hit, and we can look at other dollars that we have coming in from our increased revenues. And so they're really putting pressure on the governor to reduce this gas tax. In the meantime, she's been calling on the federal government to suspend their federal gas tax. The legislature's put forward income tax proposals that they're hoping to get to her desk. All of these things that she's come out and said these aren't sustainable, I don't necessarily support them. And so it's driving that wedge that you mentioned, Deena, because they're putting the governor in a place where she may have some of these significant tax cuts on her desk, and she has indicated that she would likely veto what's moving forward right now. Of course, we don't know at the end of the day what sort of negotiations may happen this week or how this all comes together, but she's not been overly supportive of some of the things they've been talking about so far. And so the supplemental is kind of out there too. Where do we negotiate on this? And it's just causing a lot more drama.
A lot more drama. That's the theme this week, drama. And it's funny because she proposed, some sort of tax cuts, not the ones that they put on her desk. And then, she proposes them, they up the ante. Now it's on her desk, and she's stuck between a rock and a hard place. If she vetoes it, it's really gonna probably upset those that really benefit. But if she signs it, then we're looking at probably some significant revenue shortfalls in like 2 or 3 years, and creating a deficit problem that we're not going to want to have to face. So it's really kind of a rock and a hard place. And then, supplementals are falling apart. I wanted to mention one more thing before we take some questions. Senate Bill 783 and 784 are the veterans property tax exemptions that are sitting in the Senate right now. Those are our preferred method for getting reimbursement to local units of government for their losses associated with the disabled veterans property tax exemption. They're sponsored by Senator Bumstead, and they create a refundable income tax credit for the veteran that is payable to the local unit in the amount of the property taxes. I know that sounds convoluted, but it really is the best way we found so far to get local units of government reimbursed without putting any more undue burden on the disabled veteran in order to have the benefit. So this is what we've come up with. They're sitting on the Senate floor. We're going to try and get a vote out Going to have a P2A campaign on it. I know Derek says, Deena, where's that language? But we're going to have a phone to action campaign on it, hopefully by the end of this week. So I want you to, think about talking to your senators and voicing your support for those bills. And with that, questions? I think Vaughn has a question.
Yep.
I do see. Go ahead, Derek.
I was just going to say, Vaughn has a question about an update on legislation regarding no-fault reimbursement. Looks like his county is getting some lobbying from one of the agencies about it.
Yeah, we've seen this across a few different counties. We've heard from kind of both sides, from the Insurance Alliance and then some of those that are dealing with the long-term care and workforce shortage they're having with this new proposal, or the new law that went in effect last year on it was like a 55% cap on reimbursement for certain services. From a MAC perspective, we've never got into that auto no fault fight. It's not something in any of our platforms that we've ever covered or had a discussion about. And so we really don't have a lot of focus on that. I do know there's been, I think at this point, there's like 5 or 6 different bills that have been introduced that all accomplish different things, trying to amend the auto no fault law that was just put into place last July, I believe it was, or it was implemented last July. My sense from kind of leadership and some of the discussions between the Senate Majority Leader and the Speaker's office, who were very involved with the governor on getting this law passed initially, is that it's kind of too new. I think everyone's trying to really understand the real impacts. There's a whole new department agency that's been stood up through the Department of Insurance and Financial Services to help handle these situations and really expedite remedies for them. And so, they're saying, hey, we have some things in place. Let's try to make sure we're allowing the law to be fully implemented before we go and start changing things. But honestly, I know there's about 5 or 6 different pieces of legislation that have been introduced. I haven't heard that they're really going anywhere soon, but this really isn't something Mac's ever tracked or ever been involved with.
All right. Thanks, Meghann.
That's the only question I see in the chat at the moment.
All right. Any other questions, anyone? Okay, then. Well, I think we're going to sign off. We're really looking forward to seeing everyone at our conference next week. Hopefully we see all your smiling faces. We have lots of great breakout sessions and good plenary sessions. Really looking forward to seeing everyone in person in town. All right. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Podcast 83, brought to you in part by Comcast, bringing the power of the internet into Michigan homes and businesses.